Hey, it's Kley. Hope you guys are doing well. Welcome to another video. This is going to be a kind of a dive-in explanation, overview, query about one of my favorite tube amps that I've owned for a number of years now, and it's just kind of stuck by my side. It is this Fuchs ODS Mod. Now, this is probably one of the only pieces of either guitar or amp that I own that I haven't built myself. So that should tell you something. Not to say that the stuff that I build is so good, but typically when you make something yourself, you develop some attachment to it and you kind of can tweak it to your taste. But this Fuchs amp is really, really cool. And I have felt to this point like, what Andy did with this amp is something that I probably may never be able to do. And I kind of consider him to be a real master and a genius in this field, and he really knows his stuff. So let that kind of be a recommendation in of itself. But yeah, to talk a little bit about what Andy does with this project. So Andy, the Fuchs line of amps, I think they're well known kind of in the ODS, Dumble ODS clone arena. So he has his Overdrive Supreme style amps, and he makes really, really nice high-end boutique level amps. But he also offers a mod service, which is what this amp is. And basically, he's got this long list of amps, and I think he's still doing it. You can check it out on his website. I'll leave a link in the description. But, if you have an amp that is within the list, then you can send it into his shop for a fee. I want to say it's maybe like $1,000 or something like that, maybe a little bit more. And he will basically gut the circuit and drop in one of his Overdrive Supreme circuits in its place. So reusing the cabinet, the chassis, and the transformers. And just in my own experience with tube amps, this is a pretty interesting way to go about things, because the things that he's keeping in these amps, the cabinet, the chassis, the transformers, are some of the most durable parts of an amp. They're also some of the most expensive individual components of an amp. And also, they don't necessarily have the most direct impact on the tone compared to the way that you design the circuit and the gain stages and all that. Now, the transformers will have some effect on voltage and on power and some effect on things like feel and sag. But, the combo or the head enclosure and the chassis really don't have any effect on tone whatsoever. So it's interesting to me to reuse those components from these older amps and to put them into this kind of, there's no reason that these old Fender-style boards and chassis and transformers, those things were built like tanks back in the day, and so why not reuse them in more of a modern, fresh perspective and take? This amp, to my understanding, was at one point in its life a Silverface Bassman, 50-watter, that was sent to Andy sometime before I knew. I bought the amp as it is right now. So I don't really know all the backstory. Now, I think there's some interesting discussion, and you can have your own opinions on this, and I totally respect that, as to whether or not you should send something like that into Andy to be modified, and I'll leave that up to you. But I guess, the way I choose to think about it is a lot of those amps, those Silverface amps, if it's your amp, and if it's not doing what you want, send it to Andy, and he can turn it into something pretty cool. And especially some of these old Silverface amps, a lot of them will be modded, or maybe they'll break down. And if the cost of replacing it back to its state as a Fender Silverface amp may not be worth it, so sending it to Andy, it doesn't matter if the component board is fried, it doesn't matter if the tube sockets or whatever, Andy will take all that out. So it's a cool way to get something fresh out of something old. So anyways, with this amp, the way it is now, the front panel and everything is pretty much restored. This enclosure, though, is definitely old, and it's really cool. It's got a lot of, marks and patinas, so it's kind of this very interesting mix of old and new. Now, just to talk a little bit about the overall structure of the amp, you've got a single input, then you've got this input gain control, you've got your 3-position toggle, we've got bright off, deep off, and then wild and mild, which I've also heard as like rock jazz. But those are very, very characteristic of a Dumble style amp. And I would say with these 4 controls right here at the beginning, you have a tremendous range of potential tones that you can achieve and really shift the tone and feel of the amp all the way from, a classic scooped clean Fender off to more of a modern high gain fusion. All is really kind of available here with these controls. Then you've got high, mid, low. That's your treble, mid, bass, very classic. Then over here you've got, on some of these amps you've got push-pulls. My high switch does have a push-pull, and this low switch also has a push-pull. And that will just affect the voicings, like a mid boost or a gain boost or a tone stack bypass, those kinds of things. And I'll have to check to see exactly what these do, but just know that you do have some extra tone shaping options there. Then you have this in and out, and this right here is the overdrive channel. And if you pull the out knob, it will engage the overdrive. You can also do it via foot switch. And then you have an input knob, which will cascade with this input gain. So this knob and this knob, the two input gain and the input of the OD channel, will work together to set your overdrive level. In between the two of them, you have a tremendous amount of potential gain on tap. Really, really liquid, high gain potential lead style tones. And they can be set independently. So to the input gain, you don't want to keep it so crazy low, because then you may have a hard time driving. So get up to maybe 5 or 6 is a spot that I really like it. And then with the input gain on the drive, you can really, if you start kind of at this maybe 9 or 10 o'clock, you can just have a little more of a gradual bump. We're all the way up to a really searing high gain sound. And then this output knob here is more of like sets your volume level for the overdrive channel. So it doesn't affect the gain as much as it affects the output level when you pull it out, when that's achieved. And then you've got a master. Then the reigning presence and reverb, you can set to taste as well. It does have a pretty nice tasty reverb. Now, a thought on the master, this amp is extremely loud and powerful. This is without a doubt the loudest, most powerful amp I've ever played. Just for some context, I have a 3-piece blues band, and we played an outdoor festival for several thousand people in my hometown, and I brought this amp, and I still really wasn't able to turn the master up that crazy high. So this thing can absolutely stun as far as clean headroom. It is extremely loud clean headroom available on the clean channel. And then with the driving gauge, I mean, this thing can just absolutely deafen people. It's the loudest amp I've ever played in my life. So just a monster. Then let's flip it around to the back and just take a look. We've got an IEC input, which is really nice. A lot of the old Fenders have 2-prong power cords, which aren't really very safe. You want to get a 3-prong power cord. Next, we've got our fuse right here. Then we have a pentode triode switch, which actually is pretty neat. Moving it into pentode mode is kind of your standard typical 50-watt amp. And then triode actually will cut down on some headroom, and the amp will feel a little bit spongier and saggier. So some nice experimentation there. You've got a power switch. You've got a filament heater switch. There are 2 speaker outputs, 4 ohms. So I use this with a 4 ohm 212 cab. And then you've got a foot switch. So a very simple back panel. Now, a little bit of a peek inside, and I'll provide some close-ups so you can take a look. You can see that this amp has definitely got some old school stuff going on. Now, I don't have any tubes in right now, but we've got 2 6L6 GC power tubes, solid-state rectifier. Then we've got room for 4 preamp tubes. V1 over here is definitely going to control the initial gain stage. Then V2 is more for when you pull that overdrive channel out. V3, I believe, is maybe for the reverb. And then V4, I believe, is the phase inverter, but I could be wrong on a little bit of that. But yeah, a good, healthy mix of tubes going on here. We've got a shorter, smaller reverb tank. I want to say it's maybe 9-10 inches. I'm not exactly sure, but it's not the huge full-size reverb tank that you see in some Fender amps. And then let's take a look. We've got the chassis and transformers are definitely old vintage Fender. Now the power transformer over here, to me, looks like it's more of a modern, maybe it was replaced with the amp. But this filter choke and I believe this output transformer and the cap can are certainly the original vintage Fender. So, and the chassis as well. So yeah, at this point, what I want to do is actually take the amp out of its chassis, and we can take a look at the gut shots and see some of the goods. So stay tuned for that. All right, guys, I've got the amp out of its chassis, so we can take a nice close-up view, and you can see that, yeah, this chassis is definitely from an old Fender. Now this, I believe, is the power transformer, and to me, this looks new and modern and current. This is going to be a filter choke, very old. Let's see if I can make out anything written on it. It appears to say 022699 and then -606-8-11. So I'm assuming that that would hopefully tell us some information about when and where this transformer was made. And we got this big honking thing. It actually, this to me would be the output transformer. This thing is a monster. It says Fender on it, 022871 and then 606831. I may try to do a little bit of research after this to figure out what exactly that means. But to me, those are dates, maybe 1971. Typically they're weeks and then years or something. I'm not exactly sure. But definitely an old, these two are old. Here's our cap can where our filter caps are going to be. On here is actually handwriting. It says red equals B+, pink equals screen, V10 equals bias, black equals ground. So we've got some information there about this. We've got some plates here that say Belton on them. Overall, yeah, definitely looks like an old amplifier chassis to me. Gonna go ahead and flip it around now. And twist it.
What's this?
Okay, so now we can see the inside of this amplifier. Looks really cool. Just a couple of thoughts. We've got our input over here. Let me just look at this handheld up close. Here's our input, and then you can see actually a lot of wires going on, but then we've got this circuit board. Right there it says Fuchs Audio Tech LLC ODS Mod Board Mark -2 917-9, so I believe that would be 2009-AMF. And then yeah, looks pretty interesting. We've got a PCB board. Now looks like we got some really thick traces here. You know, you can see right here we've got this ground trace that looks really, really thick. I see some shielded wire running all the way back here to V1 of our first preamp tube. So that's a good sign.
This is my screw.
And we've got just a lot of really cool looking stuff going on in here. As you can see, we've got our filament wirings here, the purple and gray. I like that he uses different colors to keep track of the polarity. And then just trying to keep an eye out for anything that I think is kind of interesting. Here's our foot switch jack, and there's some kind of control there to dial that in. I wonder what that would do. I'm going to have to do some research. But overall, I'm seeing some really solid design. This is getting more into the power section. I think these guys right here are going to be our filter caps. And they appear to be situated pretty closely to the tube upon which they filter. I'm seeing 22 UF 450 volt capacitors. That's a good sign. I am spotting right here a trim. I wonder, it says OD trim, so I'm assuming that has something to do
empty bags.
with the overdrive channel.
Some empty bags, Dad.
Alright, then just continuing to move on. There's another trim control right here. Right there. This looks to be near the presence. It's possible this could be related to bias. And then over here we've got some really beefy diodes. This is going to be our rectifier circuit. Fuchs Universal Rectifier card is what it says there. We got some instruction here. Bias 0.036 per tube. It's good to know. Something written on this big transformer. I definitely think that's a new modern transformer. And yeah, overall, we got another little guy in here. Might be a reverb transformer. Man, this thing is just cool to look inside. It's PCB driven, but still just a really cool amp. Everything looks solid. Everything looks the construction is very impressive to me. Yeah, overall, just a really cool looking amplifier. Very good color coding with the wires to make sure everything is organized neatly. Just overall a really cool looking amp. Alright, so I got the amp on the bench now, and we're taking a look at the gut shots. Now this is a fixed bias amplifier, and what that means is that the cathode of the power tubes, which is pin 8, which is I've got this red lead hooked up to, is connected to ground instead of through a cathode bias resistor. Cathode bias amps are more self-regulating with their bias, whereas a amp like this with fixed bias requires manual bias setting. You know, this would be something that would be similar with Blackface Fender or Marshall amps, whereas like a Tweed amp or a Vox is going to be cathode biased typically. So one of the things that I really like about a fixed bias amp is when the cathode isn't connected directly to ground, but there's actually a little tiny green resistor right there that is 1 ohm. And there's some fancy math behind the idea here, but the idea is that you can actually take a voltmeter, which I have set to the 200 millivolt range of direct current DC, 200 millivolt DC, and when you have 1 ohm of resistance, your voltage rating here is a 1-to-1 equivalent to the current rating in milliamps. So what this means is I've got my black lead here on ground on the chassis, I've got my red lead here on pin 8, so it'll measure the voltage between these two locations, and with 1 ohm of resistance in between, that'll give me a direct measurement of my current. So I've got myself hooked up to a speaker cab, and I'm going to go ahead and flip it on. I actually just installed a brand new set of JJ6L6GC power tubes. And you can see, turn the millivolts up. We're getting to give it a few minutes to warm up a little bit. And looking to see where this number settles in. Now another important number here is going to be my plate current, which is I believe typically pin 3 on a 6L6. I'm going to bump this up to 600 volts DC range. 483 volts direct current. So at about 38 milliamps with that amount of voltage, then I can figure out where my bias is at. So I'm going to go run some numbers and I'll be right back. So when I run the numbers on Rob Robinette's tube bias website, which I'll leave a description in below, I get readings 50% cool would be 31 milliamps. 60% average would be 37, so that's pretty much about in line with where I'm at right now, and with what the description on the chassis, it recommends a 36. And then 43 would be 70% hot. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to test those different settings just to see and do some recordings, see if there's anything that we can hear as far as a tonal difference, and see if I come up with any kind of preference that I might have as far as what I want to see about bias. Sorry, I just want to clarify something. I've been looking around and these internal trim pots don't appear to affect bias. So given the fact that the bias is spot on with what it says on the chassis, and I also went through a manual for Fuchs Overdrive Supreme, and that also recommends 36, I'm just going to leave it as is, and I'm not going to mess around with anything. Probably could look up a schematic or just kind of figure it out by what I know about bias circuits, but I don't see any adjustable bias, so I'm just going to leave it as is, and we're going to go like this. I'm going to go ahead and just do a tone check now, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this amp, enjoy the tone clips. I really like what Andy has done with these mod amps. I think they're really cool, and if you got any questions, please leave them down in the comment section below. I'll see you guys again soon. Hope you enjoyed these clips. Bye.